get going on our webinar here, preparing pasties. This was the overwhelming favorite voted by all the participants in the Making Moika class. So tonight we are preparing pasties, which is a Northwoods Hot Pocket for getting things done, especially getting things done on the go. So first things first, we are going to make our dough. The reason we're doing this first is so that we can put it into our fridge while we make our filling and go over a little quick history lesson. I promise it'll be pretty interesting. And then we'll be able to pull our dough out and make our pasties. The end of this class will be when the pasties are filled, folded, crimped, and ready to go into the oven. And then I'll give you some instructions for baking them so you can have them for dinner, hopefully tonight, or you can cool them down, freeze them, and have them for any time you need them on the go. So I want to give a special shout out and a special thanks to Mike Maleska. He's the resident dough expert for the Iron Range Pasty Fest, and he sent me a lot of videos and pictures that were really helpful in getting the dough to where we want it to be for the pasties. So I am going to switch up our screen to some of the pictures that Mike sent us. So I just want to confirm, Kaylee, are we seeing both my bowl and setting here and the screen share, or just the screen share?
I can see all of it. I don't know what everybody is.
Okay, can we get some confirmation in the chat if you're able to see both my bowl and workspace here in addition to the picture? And I'll wait just until I hear that we have confirmation there before moving on. We got some thumbs up. Okay, so what Mike wanted, he's the one who sent us all these pictures and videos. What he wanted to make clear was some really important tools that you don't need, but just make this job a little bit easier, are the bench scraper, which I have here. I also have a plastic, more pliable, foldable one. And then also the pastry knife, which is common. This is useful for cutting that fat into the flour, the lard, and the butter that we're going to be using. And then,
excuse me, Dan, we are seeing the side view of your bowl. We're not seeing directly into your bowl.
Oh, we're just seeing the side view?
Yeah, down the counter.
Thank you. Let's see if we can sort that out. I'll stop sharing here. We've got camera 2. Okay, I'll do that and I'll see if I can share screen and go back. We'll do this one. Am I able to still switch the pictures? Nope, I gotta go back to my full screen when I screen share. All right, did that fix the issue, or are we still just seeing?
We're still just seeing you from the side.
Okay. We're okay. In that case, we'll go through these pictures quick, and then we'll do it with the top-down view after that. So the first step, especially if you have that pastry knife, but if you're going to use a box grater, you're going to skip this step. So if you have the pastry knife, do this. Box grater, you can skip this. Is to cut your cold butter and your cold lard into about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch cubes. Then, oops. We have a video here to show if you have those cubes, you're going to toss them into the flour to coat them on all sides before you use your pastry knife to cut them into the flour. So this just helps make sure that the fat is coated in the flour before we start really mixing it in. And then this is a view of after you've cut it into the small chunks. We're looking about pea-sized. So Mike's showing that with this video here.
Roughly pea-sized. That's what we call pea-sized.
There he goes, mostly pea-sized. That's what we call pea-sized. And then the next step would be adding that cold water, just using a spoon or your hands to kind of mix it up into a loose, shaggy dough. It's really going to be quite grainy still at that point, even when we're going to pour it out onto our work surface. And then Mike's showing us here, putting a little bit of flour onto the work surface so that as we fold it up, we're getting enough flour into there to combine the dough. And this is what it's going to look like after we've added the water, after we've poured it out. That's our shaggy dough that from there we're going to fold together, make our layers for the pastry crust, for the pasties. And this is what it's going to look like when it all comes together. At this point, we'll be dividing it up into equal portions. That's what he's showing here, just making his marks to measure out the equal portions. And then after we've cut them apart, you can use a knife, or if you do have a bench scraper, you can use that to cut it up. We'll wrap them into plastic wrap and put them in the fridge. At that point, we'll turn our attention to our quick history lesson and then work on our filling so that the dough has time in the fridge. All those flour granules have time to soak up the little bit of moisture we've added in ice water and vinegar and really form the dough. And that'll help us rolling it out so that the dough stays together while we roll it out. So I'm going to stop screen sharing here so that we can get the top-down view. All right, and then I just want to confirm again, do we have the top-down view for participants? Are you able to see in my bowl? Yes, thank you, Greg. You are the man helping us out here. Okay, so the first thing I recommend on your workspace, if you're working at the same time as me, is laying out some parchment paper. That's what I have here on top of my granite countertop. If you have a cutting board or some other type of surface, granite would work best because granite holds the cool temperature that we need a lot better, any type of stone. But otherwise you can work on a wood cutting board, you can work on a plastic cutting board. You just want to make sure we aren't working in metal, which likewise is why I recommend using a glass bowl for this part. We really want to keep our butter and our lard cold, which is why we're using ice water. And a glass bowl is not going to conduct the heat like a metal bowl would, so we can keep everything a lot colder. So if you have your workspace put together like this, we're going to grab our flour. In the meal kits, we portioned out about 3 cups of flour. We're going to start with about 2.5. So I'm going to use my 1 cup measuring cup. And we don't really need to be specific with this because we want to be flexible with the dough. Sometimes when you're working with flour and there's a lot of moisture in the air, or if there's the absence of moisture in the air, it can really affect how your dough comes out. These flour granules can pick up some of that moisture in the air. So we want to be, reflexive of that. We want to be able to adjust as we need. So I got about 2.5 cups here. Again, kind of loose measurement just because we're going to be flexible with it. At this point, I'm going to add my tablespoon of salt. And then I'm going to mix this up just to get that salt spread throughout, because once we start adding the fat, once we start adding the water, those salt granules are going to go right to it and want to be dissolved into the liquid or attached to the fat. So this allows us to spread that salt throughout. So one thing I forgot to do right at the beginning, because I wanted to jump directly into this dough making, is I wanted to introduce my wife because she's going to be the one who's instructing me if I'm missing questions in the chat. So Kaylee, if you could come around the side of the camera.
We have a question.
We have a question, so let's introduce you, then we'll get to that question. This is my wife, Kaylee. She's the one behind the scenes helping me with this. She'll be monitoring the chat and making sure I don't miss anything. So.
Hi, everybody.
All right, I can see this question. Printed recipe says 1 teaspoon. You said 1 tablespoon. I am working with a teaspoon. That was just the nerves. We'll say it was the nerve saying tablespoon. So please follow the recipe. If I say anything wrong, stick to the recipe. I just saw Phil Anderson says only still shot side view. So we still want to, it looks like we got to keep working on the camera.
If Phil would, in the upper right-hand corner, click on the little square that says view, change to gallery view, you can see a little better that bowl shot. All
right. So hopefully that solves the problem, Phil. Let us know if it doesn't, otherwise I'm going to keep moving on here. So I'm going to pull my butter out of the freezer. I kept it in there so it would be really cold, so I'll be able to shred it since I don't have a pastry knife. So I'm going to grab my butter and my lard so we can cut that into the flour. All right, so we're going to start with the lard. If you have one of the meal kits, we did portion out our 1/4 cup of lard per kit. I'm going to use the plastic wrap just to kind of create a buffer to keep my hands a little bit cleaner, and also to try not to conduct as much heat into the lard. And I'm going to use the largest side grater on my box grater, so I get the biggest chunks.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If somebody put in 1 tablespoon of salt already, what should they do?
If you haven't mixed it up already, then try to just pull out as much as you can. If not, I think one option is starting over because we haven't gotten too far. And you save that flour for if you might want to make a bigger batch of bread, because a tablespoon of salt is about as much as you need for making like a loaf of bread. Otherwise, just omit salt from everywhere else in the recipe where we're going to add salt, and I think you'll be fine. I don't think the crust will be too salty. So I'm going to go ahead and shred the rest of my lard in here. I pulled the plastic wrap away as I got towards the end. Shifting and adjusting to the skinniest end so I can shred it without shredding my fingertips or any of my skin. Once I get to the last nub, I'm just going to dump that in. I'll cut it a little bit later with the spoon to try to mix it all in. I'm going to do the same thing with my stick of butter. So again, if you got the meal kit, signed up and received that, you should have the stick of butter in there ready to go. Otherwise, we're using a 1/4 cup, which is the equivalent of 1 stick of butter. Again, I'm going to use the wrapper to kind of create something to keep my hands a little cleaner and also keep the heat from my hands from getting into the butter as much as possible. The instructions, or the recipe also gives you some instructions if you have a food processor. It's as easy as cutting up the little chunks, throwing everything into the food processor, and grinding it up. And then with the processor running, adding your ice water vinegar mixture slowly. So I wanted to be able to have both options here, and I wanted to demonstrate the way that with the equipment that most people would have, a box grater or a pastry knife, I think most people would have over a food processor.
Someone said the meal kits were great.
Awesome. Yeah, and within those meal kits, you should have seen we have some advertising materials from Salt and Light Heritage Farm down in Two Harbors. That's Ron and Leah. They own that farm with their kids, and they do beef, and later this season they'll have pork, they'll have turkey, they'll have chickens, and they also do fruit as well. I went down to pick up the beef from them this past weekend at the Duluth Farmers Market. I was also able to pick up ramps from them, which I was pretty excited about. I used all those ramps, but I was able to find some ramps of my own here in the Finland area today, actually, that I got really excited about. I'm going to include those in my pasties today, just to make them even a little bit more local, add some flair. So I'm getting down here to the nub of my butter. Same thing, once I don't feel comfortable passing it through my grater, I'm just going to dump the rest of that nub in. All right, so at this point, we've got all our fat into our bowl. We're just going to use a spoon, like the video that Mike sent us, just to coat all this fat in flour. Those larger chunks of lard, I'm just going to try to split up with my spoon a little bit. And butter too, I know that was in here. There it is. Doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be all even. Having those different size chunks of butter and lard are actually going to make the pastry crust a lot better, in my opinion. All right, so we've got our chunks all coated. At this point, I'm going to slowly add my ice water. Try not to let the ice in at the same time. And just move the dough around as I'm putting it in. Lost an ice chunk, that's all right. Actually, what I'm going to do here, changing up the plan on the go, is create a little well and then use my spoon to stop the ice from coming in. And pour all of my ice water in, and then mix it up, pulling in from the sides. Where the water is going to go to the easiest route to escape the lowest point. So that's the next, if you're stirring it up, that's the next part you're going to stir. Seeing where the water's going, stirring that up, folding it back in, making a loose, shaggy dough. Scraping the flour from the bottom of the bowl, scraping everything from your spoon. All right, and once we can't really see any more water, any more liquid, everything looks pretty dry, that's when we're going to clear our workspace and just dump our dough out onto that parchment paper that we set down, trying to keep everything centrally located as much as possible. Getting the dough that came together in the fat off of our spoon. And so here's where that parchment paper is going to really come in handy. Again, our hands have a lot of heat that can conduct into this. We don't want to melt the butter, we don't want to melt the lard. So that's where we can use the paper to start to fold and pinch it together. Bring our dough together. Another option that Mike showed in some of those videos and in the pictures was to use your bench scraper to kind of fold over and push down. So that's another option you can do. If you use the food processor, you should be at this point with the rest of us. So we're all kind of in the same boat, and this is where we just gotta bring the dough together, fold it over to make those layers of fat and flour, which are gonna make the flaky pastry crust that we want. So what I'm doing is just folding it over, pushing it in, pulling back the parchment paper, turning it around, doing it again. And this is a really old technique with making dough. French pastry chefs will do this with their croissants, but sometimes they'll do it to create 90 to 100 plus layers in their croissants. We don't need to go that intense. We're making it a little bit rustic. We'll talk about why it's rustic in the history part of the lesson here. Then if your dough is really floury, really kind of shaggy, it's not coming together, what you can do is a teaspoon at a time or a tablespoon at a time, depending on how brave you want to be. You can add a little bit more ice water over this, fold it back in. That will let the flour take on more moisture. I'm going to do about 3 more folds and then I'm going to call it good. You got a question?
You lost your second view on Facebook.
You lost this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Facebook.
On Facebook? I'm not sure how to do that on Facebook. That's a little bit beyond the scope of my technical prowess. All right, so at this point, I will use my hands just to try to pick up some of the rest of the flour and pack it in. Oh, there's the ice cube I let fall through. We can toss that. All right, and this is where we can use a knife or a bench scraper. The recipe can make 6 pasties, so this is where we can make 6. The way I'm gonna do it is, since I have kind of a rectangle shape, I'm going to just score it in half lengthwise and then score it in thirds widthwise. And I think I did a pretty good job, so I'm gonna commit to it. Go ahead, cut those sizes out. Into our individual pasty doughs. All right, and at this point, we're going to pull out some plastic wrap and we're going to wrap them up. Just wanting to keep everything pretty tight and together so that as it sits in the fridge, we're forcing whatever fat globules we have, for lack of a better term, to marry with the flour and the ice water and vinegar and form a cohesive dough that will stay together when we roll it out. Once we have all these wrapped up in plastic wrap, we're going to move them to our fridge, do our quick history lesson, and then we're going to get into making the filling. which is the fun part. That's where you can really customize it. Depending on your cultural tradition, depending on your preference of taste, you can really go anywhere with this. We're gonna go traditional Iron Range, traditional UP, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. And we're gonna go the Finnish route because we're coming from Finland, Minnesota. I put a little apology that we'll talk about later. If you're not traditional Finnish, we made kind of a substitution in this recipe to appease the traditional Finns, according to the research I did. And if you're upset with it, if you're a pasty purist, I apologize ahead of time. Okay. So, just want to show these to the camera that's on Facebook so everyone can see. I've got my individual pasty-sized portions of dough. These are going to go right into the fridge, and then we're going to do a quick history lesson and then make our filling. All right, I'm pulling my meat out of the fridge at the same time. We've got I'll do it to this camera first, then I'll show it to the side camera. We have our Salt and Light Heritage Farm, their ground beef. And from Lakeview Dairy Farm up in Grand Marais, we got our ground pork as well. So those are the products that we have here. I'm just gonna set those aside while I clean up my space and then do a screen share. All right. So I'm going to share my whole screen, get back into our PowerPoint, present that. There we go. So again, special thanks to Mike Maleska for all the help in the resource for making that dough. Really helped me out, really made me feel confident, because the first time I ever made a pasty, I think the first time I ever ate a pasty was in preparation for this class. So that's the neat thing about cooking. That's the neat thing about having these cooking classes, is that I'm learning along with everyone that's learning in this class. And I'm not an expert. Food is my passion. I love to research it. I love to learn about the history, the traditions. I get inspired by different cuisines, different areas of the world. And a pasty is a similar type of food that you can see in various places throughout the world. It's similar to empanadas in Spain, Portugal, Latin America. It's similar to calzones, which is arguably an American Italian creation, but we can also kind of ascribe it to the Italians. And it's like a bigger version of almost like a dumpling in Southeast Asia, or a bao in China. It's similar to a bao, which is a steam bun. So we're gonna learn a little bit about the history of pasties, where they come from and how they landed here in Great Lakes region, Iron Range, Minnesota, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. So it all started with in Cornwall, England, with the Cornish pasties. I've got the map here. Cornwall is the very most southwestern region of England. In that part of England, there were a lot of tin mines, and so there are references to Cornish pasties that date back to the 11th century, 12th century England. And so it served as the lunch for the tin miners in that part, because tin was used all throughout the Middle Ages and even beyond. And the crimped crust was actually a safety measure for those miners. The reason the crusts were crimped was so that miners, with their dirty hands after mining for tin, which could have been, they also could have been dealing with arsenic or other dangerous chemicals that were present in the earth, they would eat the pasty from the thick side and just leave the crust, and then that would prevent them from contaminating the rest of their lunch. And so after they finished eating the pasty and they just had the crust left, they would bury it into the mines as an offering to the bukas, or these little goblin spirits who would help protect them while they were in the mines, prevent accidents from happening. Like I had mentioned in the Moyaka class, the reason I'm interested in Finnish heritage and in Finnish food is coming from my wife. She's got the Finnish heritage, Finnish American. I am Irish and German, so I had to include this piece, that Irish Catholic priests carried on the tradition of using pasties as like a lunchtime option when working. And so they would carry the pasties with them while they went around Northern England and Ireland preaching. And then Cornish miners during the Industrial Revolution They lost a lot of jobs in Cornwall, England, because mining was switching to iron, or mining was switching to different materials for use in the Industrial Revolution. So they moved to the Iron Range in Minnesota, to the Upper Peninsula to mine copper, and then they'd also copper mines in Australia. So I found some pictures here. We have an advertisement from Cornwall on the left. It says, "All the nice girls love a pasty." I thought that was pretty neat. And then on the right, we have miners on a lunch break in Cornwall. And so this is, you can see if you look really close, especially the guy on the right there, he's holding a pasty in his hand. And so this is an example of how the tradition started, that it was an easy meal on the go, a hot pocket for doing things on the go. And then with the migration during the Industrial Revolution, like I said, miners emigrated out of England, settled into the UP, the Iron Range in Australia. After the Cornish miners emigrated, then Finnish settlers moved in and followed and took up those mining traditions, and especially grasped onto the pasty, because there were a couple dishes in Finnish tradition that were very similar to a pasty. This idea of hearty food inside a bread, stuffed inside some type of pocket. And so Finnish recipes, what I read about, which I was very surprised because I thought Finnish Americans loved rutabagas. Rutabaga was actually traditional in the English recipe, and Finnish settlers replaced the rutabaga with carrots. Trying to pull out all of my biases from this because of my ethnicity, because of my wife, I think that carrots are a great option because it adds a little bit of color and a little bit of sweetness. I know rutabagas have sweetness too, and also if you look up, rutabagas became really prevalent in Scandinavian and Anglo countries because it was a great source of vitamin C when we didn't have citrus fruit. But I really like having the carrots and the rutabaga, so that's why we're doing both in this recipe. And then the picture here shows how some miners would reheat their pasties. They'd use their metal shovels over the candle that they kept on their miners' caps to heat up their pasty to make sure it was hot for lunch. So these are those two Finnish dishes that I mentioned. We have the pirat, or a rice stuffed pasty on the left, and then we have kalakukko, or a fish stuffed pasty on the right. Just like moika, we did liha moika, which was a beef stew. Kala moika, fish stew, was the other option that we're looking at doing next year. So kalakukko is the fish stuffed pasty. And then why are pasties popular in this part of the world? Why are they popular in the Upper Peninsula? It's because there's cultural staying power. It's because, especially those Finns, those Finnish Americans, after they birthed different generations, the Cornish miners kind of left these areas to seek out other opportunities, but the Finnish population, the Scandinavian population, really stayed put because they really latched on to pasties as a familiar cultural food, similar to the pirata. Let me make sure I got that. Pirat and the kalakukko. It became natural for them to use those. And then the way that pasties have really become popular now is as fundraisers from schools, from churches, from different community organizations. And they've really paid for opportunities for Iron Range schools, for schools in the Upper Peninsula to get a lot done. I read a couple articles that I found really fascinating about groups of 30 or more volunteers waking up at 4:30 in the morning to start preparing pasties, and then having them sold out by noon and raising on a single day $4,000 for a school that allowed an entire grade to go on a science field trip for 3 days. So that's kind of the power of the pasty now. And I just think it's a great option for packing a lunch on the go when you're out, exploring nature up here, canoeing, paddling, hiking, any option like that. Or if you're at work, we still got miners working here. In Silver Bay, we have people working in the plant. It's a great lunch option as well. So I went a little bit long there because I wanted to really let our dough cool down in the fridge, make sure it's settled up and settled together. And now we're going to make our filling to give our dough even more time. After that, we're going to stuff them. Like I said, apologies to anyone who is anti-carrot in their pasty. You're welcome to omit that if you want. It's not going to bother me. I don't want to start any wars. We're just here to make pasties. So I'm going to move my cutting board and equipment over. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. I see someone's not sure about the rutabaga, it looks like in the chat.
He's hoping.
Or he's hoping there is rutabaga. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to prepare, actually, the first thing we're going to prepare is the rutabaga, then the carrots, onions, potatoes last. The reason we want to do potatoes last is because they oxidize fast, they turn brown. So that's the last thing that we want to cook. I'm going to set all my other ingredients to the side, focus on the rutabaga. Unfortunately, I was not able to source rutabaga locally, hyper locally, for the meal kits. It did come from Canada across the border, and so that's why the rutabaga that we have has the waxy outer coating. We are going to peel that away first. When we made the Moyaka meal kits, we kind of cashed out our local farmers of their winter storage crops. And so the hope is if these cooking classes, these meal kit ideas become really popular, we can convince more farmers to prepare more storage crops so that we can have more local options throughout the year. And we can grow the scope and size of our food chain to feed more people in our community. And that's the ultimate goal. So I'm going to go over a couple of times just to make sure I get that outer layer really clear. I don't want any wax to be in my pasty. So I'm basically going to peel this twice over. I'm going to set these scraps in my garbage because they're wax coated. I don't feel good about putting them in the compost. And I'm going to grab my bowl here so that we can cut our rutabaga and then put it in. So everything we're looking for in this rutabaga, everything we're going to cut, we want it to be about like a 1/2 inch size. So I'm going to start by making slices down my rutabaga, wanting to grip the knife on the blade even a little bit so I have complete control that the knife doesn't slip and accidentally cut me, and that I can really push down, put the tip of the knife down to the cutting board, follow through the heel of the knife so that it doesn't get away from me, and make sure I get my 1/2 inch cuts. From this point, I'm going to stack up my rutabaga again. And I feel comfortable making this cut through all these slices. They might start to move if your knife isn't super sharp. If that's the case, just do 2 slices at a time. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate that. Let's be safe. I don't want anyone to lose any digits here. So let's safety first. So we're going to make our, again, 1/2 inch. These are called batons in French culinary language. Or in English, we'll call them sticks, 1/2 inch sticks. And then from there, we can turn it sideways and make our 1/2 inch cubes, or also known as large dice. At this point, if you have a bench scraper, that's a great tool for picking up everything you just chopped, putting it into your mixing bowl. And then I'll cut the rest here into our cubes. I like making my food a little bit rustic. I don't buy into the French high dining, making everything the exact same size. The different sizes and shapes will add more texture that I like in the pasty. Next, we're going to do our carrots. Again, if you are anti-carrot, go ahead and skip this step. Just hang out. We'll catch up to you in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and peel my carrots. I said in my Moyaka class, this Y peeler is like every chef's preferred peeler compared to those straight ones that you have to. These just allow a lot more control, I think. I'm going to go ahead and peel from the base to the tip all my carrots. All right. And then you're going to kind of assess the size of your carrots. Some people with meal kits got real big, honking, thick carrots, and those I'll show you how to dice. If you have kind of skinny ones like this one, comparatively, see how skinny that is? You can just chop that one up by itself. You don't need to cut it in half or dice it. So I'll demonstrate that first with these skinny carrots. We'll cut off the tip and then just use a rock and chop to cut that one up. And I'll show you, we're looking at pretty similar sizes, the carrot and the rutabaga. That's what we want, everything to be about a similar size. These carrots will take the same amount of time to cook as the rutabaga, so that's why we want to cut them the same size. For this one, what I'll do is I'll cut off the tip. This bottom half is a little bit thinner, so I'm going to cut that just like I did the skinny carrot. Once I get about halfway, I'll stop and set it aside to do a different cut for the top. If you're real advanced, you can get a little bit more chefy. And instead of the rock and chop, which is safe, you can start to show off and do some of your faster cuts. I like to keep things safe. I don't have anyone to impress. I'm already married. We made the commitment. I don't need to show off too much anymore. So I'll just make a couple more cuts here, rock and chops, and then I'll show how to do the larger cuts. All right, so then if we're making our larger cut, I'm going to cut the top of the carrots off. Set those aside. And the safest way to do this is by keeping the tip of your knife on the board. If it raises off the board and you're trying to cut through the heel as you're holding the carrot, that's where it can slip. But if you keep the tip of your knife on the board, you'll have the most control to cut it lengthwise. And because of how skinny these carrots are, I'm only going to do it once. If you have a real thick carrot, we're talking like 2 inches in diameter, you'll want to make this lengthwise cut another time into quarters. So I'm going to go through and again showing that tip down, cutting the carrot through, making sure I don't lose control of the knife on all of these. Then I'm going to just finish up and chop them off. Any questions in the chat?
Good for right now.
Good for right now.
Mm-hmm. You must be a good teacher.
Well, I want to ask everyone if they're not too busy to let me know what they think. Do carrots belong in pasties, or is that sacrilege? You can type it in the chat. Let me know.
We got one yes to carrots.
All right.
Team carrots.
I'm on team carrot, yep. Like I said, it's going to add some variation on the color. I know you're not really going to see it when we stuff it in the pasty, but when you take a bite and you get that cross section, it's nice to see a little bit of color instead of just gray blob.
Everyone so far is on board with carrots.
All right, we must have a lot of Finnish Americans in our midst. I know a lot of those Yoopers are pretty particular. Rutabagas only. Rutabaggers, no carrots. All right, so we got our carrots and our rutabaga in the bowl. We'll go to our onions next. Cutting off the top. And then the root end that has the stringy roots. What I do is I just barely make a slice just to clear those roots off. So I have something flat to cut it in half. That will make it a lot easier to peel, and it'll make it a lot easier when we make our dice later. So I'll do the same for the second onion. Cut the top off, barely cut off the root end, cut in half, peel the outer we'll say 1+ layers, depending on what it looks like. If you've got a little bit of yellow or brown on the onion, peel off an extra layer. If it doesn't look like it's going to taste good, peel off an extra layer. Onions are pretty cheap, and they're compostable, so if you need to waste an extra layer to make sure you have a better product, I say go for it. It's not really a waste. It's going to go in the compost if you have a compost, so don't worry about it.
Someone said sometimes they add frozen peas.
Frozen peas. Ooh, yeah, that's very English, I think. kind of combining two different regions of England, I'm guessing. But that would be a great addition for this to add kind of like a fresh snap. So my onions have a little slimy layer that goes in, that sometimes grows in between the outermost layer. It's between every layer really, but it really becomes prevalent in the outermost layers where it gets a little bit thicker. So I'm going to peel that off. And then for this, I'm going to cut almost to the base that we have, but not quite. And again, 1/2-inch cuts. Turn it sideways and finish my dice. What I like to do when I get to my last cut is turn it over, make one more cut horizontally and then the other way to get the most out of the onion, so that we're wasting the least amount as possible. So I'm gonna go through, quick do my onions. All right, because I got a big pile of onions here, that bench scraper is really going to come in handy for me. Make quick work of the transfer here. All right, like I had mentioned before, I finally found my patch of ramps, and I harvested about 1/2000th of it, just hardly any at all, because I want to make sure it comes back next year. And I'm going to just thin slice these all the way up. This is a local forage product that I found in the Finland area today. And I just want to make sure that I address, if you're out foraging for local products, please take less than half of what you see so that they can grow back year after year. And if it's a new patch like the one I found today, take even less, because you don't know how many people have gone out there, how many people use that patch, and you don't want to take too much. So I am just planning to use this for my personal cooking. If I go back to the patch to harvest a little bit more, I'm only going to grab what I need for that meal. I don't want to over harvest it because these are really precious to me and I don't want to lose them year after year. So I'm going to just make a thin cut through these, almost like you're cutting green onions. And just keep that same size cut as I go through the leaves. This is going to add a pop of green, a nice garlicky flavor, because you'll notice the recipe is absent of garlic. I don't think garlic is necessary in everything. I think it's a delicious flavor, but I don't think we need to put it in every single dish that we make. This is just something really special, having ramps. So that's why I wanted to add it to our dish today. And then, now we can go to our potatoes. So, I prefer to leave my skin on with the potatoes. I don't mind the texture that it adds. If you are against that, you're more than welcome to peel these before we dice them. I'm just going to leave them on because I like them that way. And we're going to cut them just like the rutabaga, where we start with our thin slices, about a 1/2 inch. And that potato starch might stick to your knife a little bit, which can make this tough and a little bit dangerous. And then I'm going to separate my slices out so I have a flat potato to cut into. My stack isn't too tall. Make my cuts into sticks, almost like I'm cutting French fries, and then put them horizontal, make my 1-inch cubes. Again, using my bench scraper, dumping them in the mix. What time we got? All right, we're doing all right, so about 5:45. The nice thing is the pork and the beef that we have is already ground for us.
Speaking of pork, someone was wondering if it is pre-seasoned.
The pork and beef we have is not pre-seasoned. So if that's someone wondering, was the person who put in the 1 tablespoon of salt because I made a mistake, and I'm again sorry about that. You don't need to add any seasoning to this mixture we're making. If you did add just the 1 teaspoon of salt, then we can put a little bit of salt into this filling mixture that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and just slice up all my potatoes and then turn and dice them. And again, the pork came from Lakeview Dairy Farm, which is up in Grand Marais, just off the Gunflint Trail. And our beef came from Salt and Light Farm, which is in Two Harbors. Both these facilities use a USDA-approved butcher shop or processing facility. So they can be purchased at some grocery stores. They can, I know some restaurants down in Two Harbors, and our barbecue business, Babson River Barbecue, plans to use the beef from Salt and Light Heritage Farm because it's a locally grown product, grown to organic standards. Getting the organic label is just expensive and a hoop to jump through, and if they can offer beef at a more affordable price while not having that organic label but still doing all the same processes, that was the choice they made to take care of their community and offer beef at a price more people could afford. It's still high quality beef, so it still is going to cost more than what you'll see at the grocery store, but in my eye, it's worth it. It's better for the environment, it's a better tasting product, and you can take some pride in it knowing that it comes from within 50 miles of where you live.
Can you use any kind of potato for the pasty?
Yep, red potatoes work great. We have russets here, that's what came in the meal kit, but any potato that you grow really works here. Fingerling potatoes, red potatoes, gold potatoes. I chose russets because they were most widely available. Most people would be familiar with them, and they're going to be a little bit sturdier, whereas like a red potato, gold potato might be a little bit softer, creamier in the pasty. So I wanted to add a little bit more texture, but any potato will work. And potatoes really do vary a lot in how they taste. I know my neighbor up here, he grows Kennebec potatoes, which is actually the exact same variety that McDonald's uses for their French fries. They make a really, really great fried potato. And so the first year we moved up here, he had too many potatoes from his harvest, and he dropped a bag of them off for us that we then used for mashed potatoes in our Thanksgiving dinner, and we also made some French fries out of them. They were double blanched and then twice fried French fries. They turned out pretty great. Do you remember that, Kaylee?
I do. They were really, really good.
I guess I'm fishing for a compliment there. I'm a fisherman. Well, that makes sense. All right, and 1/2 potato left. Oops, I made kind of a skew cut, so I'm just going to try to straighten it out. If not, that's okay. We like those textures, those different shape cuts. All right, so we got all of our veggies done. Again, we did those potatoes last just so they wouldn't oxidize as much, but that potato is really going to add the filler to make this pasty super hearty. And that's what we want, because if we're following tradition, this is what kept those miners going in a grueling job for 10, 12-hour days. All right, I'm going to clean my hands up before I go into using the meat. And then at this point, it's as simple as cutting our meat open, adding it to the mix. I just see kind of a wonky looking potato I'm going to pull out. There's another little bit. Quality control. Adding that pound of ground beef. And the pound of ground pork. So I'm going to use my hands to mix this up. You're welcome to use a spoon, a potato masher, something else to kind of stir it up. I'm going to use my hands because I feel like I can have the most control over mixing it evenly with my hands. Let's add some seasoning before we get to mixing. So I'm going to start with another about teaspoon of salt sprinkled over. And then in the recipe, I edited the recipe we got from the Iron Range Pasty Fest to say 1 dried green herb and 1 kind of like dried spice. What I chose to do here is I ground up in my mortar and pestle. I have like 6 allspice berries, kind of following that flavor that we had from the Moyaka. And then I also put in a little bit of rosemary because it's one of my favorite herbs, and some thyme because that's what the original recipe called for. So I've got about 6 allspice berries and then a half teaspoon thyme and a teaspoon of rosemary that I ground up. I'm going to mix together. I'm going to add some black pepper too. All right, and then I'll get in there with my hands. Start by splitting up the meat, mixing that together. And then using both hands to get in and really mix it up. Oh, hey, this is my first time using this product from Lakeview Dairy Farm, the pork. I just found a little piece of parchment paper, so be on the lookout for that. They might have used that while they were portioning it into the single pounds just to keep things separated. And it might be common in everyone, so just be on the lookout. You might get a little piece of parchment paper. We don't want that to end up in our finished product.
Someone said that these are going to be huge.
Huge pasties? Yeah, you know, I made this recipe when I did the full recipe I received from Iron Range Pasty Fest was for 12 pasties. I halved all of the ingredients. And the pasties I made were pretty big, I'll say that. But
they also said they're hungry though.
We'll
so.
see. Well, yeah, this will be filling. And the nice thing about this is, if you have extra filling, you could store it and just make another batch of dough. It'll keep in the fridge for probably 48 hours. So you can make more pasties. And why not stuff the freezer full of these so that you can pop them in a toaster oven, pop them in your regular oven, even microwave them. The crust won't be as crispy and nice if they're frozen and then microwaved, but it'll still be tasty as heck, and it'll still get you full. And so if you like to eat food because you like the flavor, you enjoy savoring every bite, I would recommend using a toaster oven, using a regular oven. But if you're efficient and you need this because you're out cutting wood, going on hikes, paddling, fishing, keeping this just in your lunchbox, you can microwave it. It'll get the job done. It'll be a heck of a lot better than getting something out of a gas station, getting something from a fast food place. You know, that was something I read in my research was someone who does a lot of driving through the UP recommended stopping at a pasty shop and said this is their fast food when they're on the road. This is the place they choose to stop, is to get a pasty, because you can take it on the go. It doesn't take any time at all to stop in a shop, pick up a couple pasties, and get back on the road. So we got it pretty well mixed up. At this point, I see we got another question.
Someone's just wondering about cabbage, and they also wondered about nutmeg.
Yeah, that's where you can really customize this to your personal preference. Cabbage would be great. It has about an equivalent water quantity to onion. So that's where, if you're going to add cabbage, maybe cut back on the onion, maybe cut back on the amount of cabbage you add, do 50-50, because you don't want to get this too watery, steaming out the filling. That's why we have a lot of the hardy vegetables like potato with starch, the rutabaga, because that's going to take a lot of the moisture, and the crust will take some moisture too. So just thinking about that way. The other thing you can do if you want to add more cabbage is you can saute it ahead of time. And then that will get some of that moisture out, and you'll cool it down, and then you'll throw it into this mix with the rest of the raw vegetables and meat. So I'm going to use my forearms to move this bowl aside. While I clear my space, wash my hands. And now it's time to pull the dough back out of the fridge. All right, so we gave our dough a chance to rest in the fridge. For rolling it out, this is where if you have a little bit more flour left in your bag, you can put that on your workspace in a pile. I like to set it off to the side so that I can just pull whatever flour I need into my workspace I'm going to be rolling out. And then that way I don't add too much. You can also put it in a bowl if you don't want to have a lot of mess to clean up. And I'm just going to shape this kind of into a round because I want a round for my pasties. Set it out and use a rolling pin. You can use a wine bottle if you have it. You can use anything that's cylindrical and won't really get stuck to the dough. And I'm actually going to put just a little bit of flour on my rolling pin too. And then start with a couple of rolls one way, flip the dough, and do it again. This dough is still a little moist, which means I need to add a bit more flour to it. A little bit more flour to my rolling pin. And do it again. I like to do about 3 rolls and then rotate. We're looking to get it pretty thin, about 1/4 inch or less. Sometimes if it starts sticking to the bottom, you can flip it over. And if you look really closely, let's see. If you look really closely, I'm not sure if the lighting's good enough, you can still see those pea-sized chunks of fat in our dough. That's what we want. We want to see that because that's going to make it really flaky and a crispy pastry crust, which will make this pasty really tasty. I saw in some of the research I did, recipes called for rolling out all your dough at once and then using like a cake pan or a pie tin to cut out perfect circles. You know, I'm going to skip that because I like that rustic shape, that rustic look. We got our about 1/4 inch here, maybe a little bit more rolled out on this side. And at this point, what we're going to do is take a cup of filling, and I have a nice portion scoop here, and put it on 1/2 of our pasty. The other thing that the original recipe calls for, which I didn't have enough butter to provide in all the meal kits, but if you have some butter at home, which I do here, so I'm going to encourage everyone to do this, is to take a little pat of butter about, again, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch thick, put it on top, then roll our pasties over. Trying to keep that butter centered. All right, these are big pasties. Our dough is pliable though, so we do have some room to work with it. Now, I prefer to have a folded over and then crimped crust. So I'm actually going to use the skill I learned at Papa Murphy's Pizza, making our big stuffed pizzas, to pinch the dough, fold it over, and then just keep working my way around to close this up. Trying to smooth out any air that you can and just pinching it closed. At this point, you're welcome to take a fork to crimp the edges if you like. I'm not going to. I prefer this kind of braided look, but I will use the fork to poke a couple of holes in it. And then I'm going to transfer this to my prepared baking sheet with a parchment paper. So I'm going to show 2 more, and then I'll show the egg wash that we do, and then we'll put it in the oven. And after that, we'll end the class so that you can finish the rest of your pasties on your own. And then that'll kind of be the end of the class. So I'm going to do 2 more, like I said. Again, putting a little dough down, opening up our crust, putting a flour down, opening up our dough ball. There I go, making mistakes with my words again. Trust the recipe more than you trust the words from my mouth. Flattening that out and starting to roll. Doing 2 or 3, flipping it. 2 or 3. All right, there we can get a much better picture of some of that fat, those chunks of fat. Oh, that's not going to be good enough because of the sunset. You won't be able to see it, but having those chunks of fat, that's the key that Mike Maleska talked about that really makes a great pasty. That's the key to any type of pastry dough, whether you're making pies, whether you're making empanadas, pasties, anything with a pastry dough, a tart, having those chunks, some biscuits too, having those chunks of fat in between the dough. As it bakes, that fat will cook out, and that's what's really going to make it nice and flaky and delicious. All right, at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about the size of my dough. Get another scoop of filling. You know, as I'm looking at this, we're going to have a lot of filling still. Might be an error in the recipe, but that's okay. More pasties is not a problem. We'll just make some more dough. Fold this over. I need the pat of butter first. Yeah, go ahead. We got a question.
So when you put that filling in like that, could you like squish it down so it's not like...
Yeah, you can flatten it a little bit. For the cook time that we have here, which will be about 35-45 minutes, having it a little bit taller is what we want because it will give it time to cook all throughout. If you're going to flatten it and make it a little bit smaller, you might want to check it after, say, 30 minutes, 25-30 minutes. So I got my filling, I got my butter, crimped my crust, make my pokes, transfer it to the baking sheet. We'll do one more. The other thing you could do with all of this extra filling, if you don't want to make more pasty dough, is you could just throw it all on a baking sheet with a little bit of oil over top, make a one-pan dinner, serve it with some crusty bread, maybe after it's cooked 3/4 of the way, crack a couple eggs on it. Man, that would be a good dinner. So again, I'm just rolling this out a couple turns each direction. This one's going to be more of a rectangle or kind of a square shape than a circle, which is okay. I'm adding a little bit of flour between the turns if I notice it's sticking to the rolling pin or if it's sticking to the countertop. Yeah, I could use a little more flour. There we go. You're not going to hurt it by adding too much flour. It'll take what it needs, and if it does look like you put too much flour on, you can just kind of shake it off and it'll drop what it doesn't want. All right, I feel good about that. Shape, that thickness. We'll get our pat of butter. We'll fold it over. Crimp, braid our crust. Poke our holes. Transfer to the baking sheet. All right, so I'm just going to kind of speed ahead a little bit here and let you see what the next step is. Even though we don't have all of our pasties rolled out, we're hitting that 6 o'clock hour. We're even a couple minutes past it, so I want to finish up here so everyone can get on closer to eating. So we're going to crack an egg into a bowl. I'm also going to put just a splash of water from my sink. And then we're going to whisk this up. This will be the egg wash, which will give us a nice sheen, a nice caramel color to the outside of our pasties. Once that egg is whisked up, you can use a spoon, you can use a pastry brush like I have here, and just brush it on top. And brush it onto the braids. And then I like to finish with just a sprinkle of salt on each one. And then we can put that into the oven at 350 degrees. Let's take a look at the recipe just to confirm how long. Yeah, 45 to 50 minutes, or until the internal temperature is at least 165. We need to get there so that that meat cooks all the way through. And now, in an homage to Rachel Ray, Paula Dean, Ina Garden, Giada De Laurentiis, and Alton Brown on Food Network, we're going to do a little bit of TV magic and pull out some finished pasties. So these are ones I made as a tester. I put them in the freezer. These have been in the oven for about the past hour at 300 degrees. I went a little bit lower. I did cook them fully, cool them down, and then freeze them. And so I just put them in the oven to finish them. And so you can see they did get a little bit of color all around it. We got that nice golden brown on top. And we can cut through it. Crispy pastry crust. We've got our hot filling. This one I put some mushrooms in addition to the beef and pork, carrots, rutabaga, and potatoes. And I put a little bit of Worcestershire sauce in too, just as an experiment, but it turned out really great. So this is what the finished product is going to look like after 40 to 45 minutes, or 45 to 50 minutes in the oven. I'd start checking it at about 30. And if you have a thermometer, temping the inside, making sure it's at least 165 degrees, then you can pull it out, let them cool down a little bit, and then you can have them for dinner. Put gravy on it if you're from the range, put ketchup on it if you're from the UP, however you like it. I'm not here to judge. Good food is good food, so eat it the way that you like it. And go ahead and roll out the rest of those pasty doughs. If you have that leftover filling, like I said, you can double this batch for the dough recipe and make more, so you have more in the freezer. Or you can use a baking sheet and make a one-pan meal out of the rest of this filling. So, go forth and experiment. Now we're going to open up to any questions, any suggestions for future cooking classes. The closer we get to spring and summer. I also want to advertise the Finland Farmers Market will be opening on right now the second week of June, June 10th. So that's weather permitting, that's growing season permitting, but that's our anticipated start date. So be on the lookout for that. Thursday evenings, starting June 10th. And then the other thing is go on Facebook and look up the Iron Rage Pasty Fest and follow them. They didn't do the Pasty Fest this past year, or they did it in a more just limited version, but they're hoping to increase that again for this next year. So take a look at that. That's where we got our recipe from, and they do a really great job.
Dan, just a quick comment. The Finland Farmers Market opens June 9th, which is a Thursday.
Let's confirm that. I'm just going to take a quick peek at my schedule.
Oh, you're right. 10th.
June 10th? Okay. Yep, Thursday, June 10th is our first night of the farmers market. The other project we have kind of in the works right now that will be opening about the same time is a satellite produce stand Saturday mornings in Silver Bay. There'll be more information to follow on that, but it just gives us two opportunities to buy local produce, to support this local food chain, to make sure we are supporting the producers, the farmers, the growers, the foragers in this area, so that we can continue to be a sustainable food system on the North Shore. So, Kaylee, were there any other questions?
I don't think I saw any.
All right. Well, in that case, we ran about 9 minutes over. Thank you for bearing with me. Sorry about the mistake about the tablespoon of salt instead of teaspoon of salt. My apologies. My Catholic guilt is just I'm gonna wake up in the middle of the night 3 years from now and just feel really bad about that. And also sorry about how much filling this produced. I think we just got too much produce, and so we tried to portion it out appropriately. But I think if you cut up and mixed all of your filling like I did from the bag I used, you're going to end up with more filling than the amount of dough that we have. And hopefully we gave you some things to do with that filling so it doesn't go to waste.
Could you freeze the filling?
Yeah, you could freeze the filling. That should be fine. And then you could thaw it out and fill out pasties later. It might kind of change the texture a little bit of the potatoes. They might be a little bit more squishy, but that's okay. In the filling of a pasty, that's just fine. So I think this one has cooled down enough. I'm gonna go ahead and have a bite. My favorite part is the part that the miners threw away. I love eating the crust like that. You can see the different layers that we have on that crust. So I probably would have died of arsenic poisoning if I was a miner, to be honest. That's good. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Cheers. Enjoy this weather. Enjoy the weekend. Get outside. Bring a pasty with you.